The thing nobody tells you about information overload is that it's not an accident. It's a feature of any system where the people at the center have to perform certainty they can't actually possess. Think about what you've consumed in the last week. News, commentary, analysis, takes. And at the end of it, do you feel more oriented? Do you understand the economy better? Or what's actually happening with the markets? Or why your grocery bill still doesn't match what they tell you inflation is doing? Or do you feel like you've been handed 100 different maps, all of them confident, none of them for the same city? That feeling is not a failure of your attention. And it is not a problem you're going to solve by finding the right podcast, the right newsletter, the right expert. The problem is structural. And a man who died in 1992 described it in 1945 while writing about something else entirely. His name was Friedrich Hayek. He was an Austrian-born economist working in London. And the paper he published in 1945, a paper about prices, about allocation, about why central planning fails, turns out to be the most precise description ever written of why the modern information environment leaves you exhausted and confused. He wasn't trying to describe the internet. He was trying to describe why no single mind can ever know enough to run an economy. But the mechanism is the same. And once you understand it, you'll never watch a cable news segment the same way. Here's what I want to do in this video. I'm going to give you 3 mental models drawn directly from Hayek's work, not productivity tips, not thinking frameworks from a business book. 3 specific instruments, each one grounded in a verified argument Hayek made. Each one tested against a documented case where it predicted exactly where expert certainty failed. And by the end, I want you to have 3 questions you can apply to anything you read or watch in about 30 seconds that will tell you whether what you're looking at is a signal or noise. The 3rd model is going to change how you see financial commentary. We're going to get there. But first, let me show you the problem we're actually solving. Every information environment has an incentive structure. That's not a conspiracy. It's just a fact about how things work. The people who appear on screens and in headlines are there because somebody put them there. And somebody put them there because they reliably do something valuable for the organization that employs them. Here's the question. What is the thing they reliably do? It is not accuracy. Accuracy is hard to verify in real time, the feedback loop is slow, and being wrong doesn't reliably cost anyone their platform. What is easy to verify in real time, what the feedback loop rewards immediately, is conviction. Clarity. The decisive reading. The person who tells you what it means. Now, cleanly with confidence. The audience is exhausted and wants orientation. The system delivers voices that perform orientation, not voices that have it. Hayek noticed this mechanism, not in media, but in something structurally identical. In his 1944 book, The Road to Serfdom, he described why any system that selects for effectiveness at advancing a cause rather than accuracy about a subject will systematically elevate the wrong people. The scrupulous person, the one who says, "I'm not sure," who qualifies, who acknowledges limits, is at a disadvantage in any environment that rewards visible certainty. The unscrupulous one, who says whatever moves people most, wins. He was writing about political planning. But the mechanism is the same in media. The information environment selects for conviction. And the people with the most conviction are not necessarily the people with the most knowledge. They're the people most comfortable claiming knowledge they don't have. That's the problem. Now here's the first instrument that lets you see it. Model 1, the knowledge problem. In 1945, Hayek published a paper called The Use of Knowledge in Society. The argument is this. The fundamental economic problem is not one of allocating known resources from a central position. It's the problem of making use of knowledge that is not given to anyone in its totality. Read that again slowly. No one has it in its totality. What does that mean in practice? It means that the knowledge required to make any complex system work is dispersed. It's spread across millions of people, held in fragments, often tacit, not written down, not articulable in a report, just embedded in the experience of the person who has lived it. The farmer who knows his soil, the small business owner who knows her customers, the machinist who knows what the machine sounds like when something's about to go wrong. None of that knowledge exists in any headquarters, and the headquarters can't get it, no matter how many surveys it runs or models it builds. Hayek's language here is exact. He wrote that the knowledge of the circumstances we must use never exists in concentrated or integrated form. but solely as the dispersed bits of incomplete and frequently contradictory knowledge which all the separate individuals possess. His solution was the price system, because prices compress all that dispersed information into a single signal that anyone can read without needing to understand the millions of decisions that produced it. The price is the map. When you distort the price, you erase the map. Now apply this to information. When a commentator on television tells you what the inflation numbers mean, or what the market is going to do, or what the unemployment figures really signal, what is their knowledge base? They are at the center, they have access to the same published reports you have access to, they have the same institutional data. What they don't have is the local knowledge, the particular circumstance of time and place, what it actually feels like to run a small business in Ohio right now, what the supplier is actually telling the manufacturer, what the landlord is actually offering the tenant. The person with the microphone is at the center, the knowledge is at the edge. Hayek's point was that this is not a correctable problem. It's a structural one. You can't fix it by hiring smarter commentators or giving them more data. The data they have access to is, by its nature, a compressed abstraction of the living reality it describes. The more complex the system, the greater the gap between the abstraction and the thing. Here's what that gap looks like when it costs you money. In March of 2021, the Federal Reserve's official position was that the inflation the country was beginning to experience was transitory. That was not a casual remark. It was the official forecast from the most powerful monetary institution in the world, armed with the most sophisticated economic models available to anyone. The people at the center, with more data than anyone, looking at the same signals the rest of us were looking at. By June of 2022, the Consumer Price Index had risen 9.1% year over year, the highest rate in 40 years. The Fed began raising interest rates aggressively, reversing the position it had held for more than a year. The price signal, the actual number at the grocery store, the actual number on the rent notice, the number your savings account was silently losing, told the truth before the commentary did. The people with the microphone were wrong. The signal was right. That is the knowledge problem, in real time, in your savings account. The first question you carry out of this video. When you hear a confident claim about a complex system, ask yourself, does this person have the local knowledge or just the central data? If they're at the center, they have the model. They don't have the reality. Model 2, the pretense of knowledge. In 1974, Friedrich Hayek received the Nobel Prize in economics. He was 75 years old, and the dominant economic framework of the previous 50 years was visibly collapsing around him. That framework, Keynesian economics, had held that there was a stable, predictable relationship between inflation and unemployment. If you wanted to reduce unemployment, you accepted a little more inflation. If you wanted to reduce inflation, you accepted a little more unemployment. The relationship was called the Phillips curve, and it had been the foundation of macroeconomic policy in most Western countries through the 60s. Then came the 70s, stagflation, high inflation and high unemployment simultaneously, the thing the model said couldn't happen. The dominant consensus, built on decades of data and defended by the most credentialed economists in the world, had failed. And Hayek had said it would. In his Nobel lecture, he called his address "The Pretense of Knowledge." And the argument he made that December was not triumphalist, it was a warning. He said that the danger in economics, and in any discipline that deals with complex, organized phenomena, is the attempt to achieve the precision of the physical sciences in a domain that doesn't permit it. When you build a model of a complex social system and present its outputs as prediction, you're not being scientific, you're performing science. And the performance is dangerous because it produces confidence in conclusions that the underlying knowledge cannot support. His exact phrase, "The scientist who does this will do more harm than good." Now hold that for a moment. 2020. A respiratory virus is spreading, and governments around the world need to make decisions about how to respond. An epidemiological team at Imperial College London produces a model. The model predicts that without intervention, the United States could see 2.2 million deaths. That number drove policy. Lockdowns, school closures, economic shutdowns affecting hundreds of millions of people. The decisions made in March of 2020 were based substantially on the output of that model. By the end of 2020, the CDC's recorded COVID-19 death toll in the United States was approximately 385,000. That is a tragedy. It is also a fraction of the modeled prediction. The actual outcome was less than 18% of the forecast. A model built on necessarily incomplete knowledge presented with the authority of science, used to justify decisions affecting the entire country. That is the pretense of knowledge, not conspiracy, not malice, mechanism. The important thing Hayek said, and this is the part that converts alarm into clarity, is that the correct response to this reality is not cynicism. It's appropriate humility. The antidote to the pretense of knowledge is not the pretense of ignorance. It is a better understanding of what kind of knowledge is actually available in complex systems, and what kinds of claims that knowledge can and cannot support. The second question: what would this expert have to concede in order to be appropriately uncertain about this claim? If the answer is everything, if certainty is built into the role, not earned by the evidence, you're watching a performance, not an analysis. Model 3. The intellectual capture. Here is the one that changes how you read financial commentary, and the media, and academic consensus, and most of what passes for expert opinion. In 1949, Hayek published an essay called The Intellectuals and Socialism, and it is one of the most uncomfortable things he ever wrote, because it describes something that everyone who works in the world of ideas knows is true and nobody wants to say out loud. He argued that in any modern society, the ideas that eventually shape policy and culture do not travel directly from the original thinker to the public. They travel through an intermediate class, what he called the intellectuals, but what we would today call the commentariat, the pundit class, the explainers, not the original researchers, not the people with primary knowledge, the second-hand dealers in ideas, the people whose job is to take something complex and translate it into something digestible. And here's the mechanism he identified. This class does not select ideas based on their truth or their evidence. It selects ideas based on their coherence and their appeal. A framework that produces clean, dramatic narratives, that divides the world into clear categories, that explains everything with a single cause, that produces confident predictions, will spread through the intellectual class faster than a framework that is accurate, but messy, uncertain, and resistant to simplification. He wrote this in 1949, 75 years ago. Long before cable news, long before the algorithm, long before the engagement metric, the intellectual class doesn't need to be corrupt, it doesn't need to be conspiring, it just needs to be doing its job, which is producing content that people consume. And content that produces the clearest, most emotionally satisfying narrative will outcompete content that produces the most accurate, most qualified, most uncertain picture of reality. Think about what that means for every domain where you consume expert opinion. Financial commentary. The vast majority of financial media exists to help you understand what's happening in the markets. But the people producing it don't have local knowledge. They have the same published data you have. Their job is not to be right. It's to be compelling. The analyst who says, "I genuinely don't know where this goes," and anyone who claims to know is guessing, is not going to hold your attention for 8 minutes. The analyst who says, "Here's exactly what this means, and here's what you need to do," will. One of those people is describing reality. One of them is doing the job the system rewards. This is not a criticism of individuals. It's a description of the incentive structure Hayek identified in 1949, playing out in every medium, at scale, accelerated by every technological development since. The third question: whose job depends on this claim being clear and confident rather than accurate and uncertain? If there's a structural incentive to perform certainty, if the platform, the publication, the institution rewards the decisive take, then certainty is what you're getting, whether or not it's warranted. Now I need to tell you something that changes the frame on everything I've just said. Friedrich Hayek was an economist. He was agnostic. He explicitly rejected the label conservative. And yet, in 1944, the same year he published The Road to Serfdom, a man on the other side of the intellectual world, working in a completely different tradition, published a short book that described the same enemy from the opposite direction. His name was C.S. Lewis, the man who wrote The Chronicles of Narnia, a Christian, a literary scholar, a professor at Oxford, a man who had read almost nothing of Hayek, and wrote in a tradition entirely separate from economics. In 1943, Lewis published The Abolition of Man. The argument was this: there is an expert class, he called them the conditioners, who believe they have the standing to redesign human values from the top down. Not through force, necessarily, through education, through culture, through the steady replacement of inherited moral tradition with a framework their own reason has produced. And his warning was that this class would, with the best intentions, hollow out the very human substance they believed they were improving, because the wisdom embedded in tradition, in moral inheritance, in the accumulated experience of generations, cannot be reconstructed from a desk. It can only be destroyed from one. Hayek called it the fatal conceit. Lewis called it the abolition of man. They never collaborated. They arrived from opposite traditions: agnosticism and Christian faith, economics and literature, Vienna and Oxford. 1 year apart, the same diagnosis. What this convergence tells you is something important. The knowledge problem Hayek identified is not an economic theory that happens to have political implications. It is a description of the limits of human reason when confronting inherited complexity. And the people who have seen it most clearly have come from every corner of human thought. Not because they shared a politics, but because they shared an honest confrontation with how much any single mind can know. The information environment that overwhelms you is not a new problem. It is the oldest problem of modernity, the belief that clarity can be manufactured at the center. Hayek knew it. Lewis knew it. And the 3 questions you now have are instruments built on that knowledge. The guide in the description does for 12 of Hayek's warnings what this video did for 3. Each one laid out with a real 2020 to 2026 example, and the argument written out in a form you can actually use at the dinner table, in conversation, wherever you need it. The link is in the description. It's called the Serfdom Decoder. So here are the 3 questions. Write them down if it helps, or just hold them. When something claims to know what's happening in a complex system, does this person have local knowledge or just central data? The map is not the territory. The model is not the market. The report is not the economy. The person at the center has the abstraction. The reality is somewhere else. When a claim carries more certainty than the evidence can support, what would appropriate uncertainty look like here, and why isn't that what I'm seeing? If certainty is required by the role rather than earned by the evidence, you're watching the pretense. The pretense is not lying. It's a structural feature of any institution that needs to appear to know. When an expert produces a clean, compelling narrative, whose job depends on this being clear and confident rather than accurate and complicated? The most coherent explanation is not always the most truthful one. The intellectual class rewards what spreads. What spreads is what converts complexity into clarity, even when the complexity is irreducible. These are not skepticism tools. They're not there to make you distrust everything. They're there to help you locate the signal inside the noise, to ask, before you accept a frame, whether the person offering it is in a position to know what they're claiming. You're not lost because the world is too complex. The world has always been complex. You're lost because the system that was supposed to help you navigate it has been optimized at every level for something other than navigation. Now you have the questions. The map is yours to read. One thing I'd be genuinely curious about: tell me the one time in your life you saw something coming that nobody around you believed was real until it happened. Not a prediction you made. Something you knew, because you were living it, because you had the local knowledge, that the people with the microphones got wrong.